That was unexpected. Our message for today is stay awake and be prepared. This is a shofar, a ram's horn. When you hear them talk about blow the trumpet in the Old Testament, this is what it was. And that is the call that you would hear at the beginning of the service on the Jewish New Year, which is also in the fall. And the message is, pay attention, stay awake. So since Wendy doesn't have her own church this year, I got to use the shofar and startle this congregation instead of her other congregations that she's done this. So that was all about. And the idea is it's unexpected. It's a surprise. You don't know when and how it may happen. Every year when we come to the first Sunday of Advent, I'm reminded of my first Sunday in the Episcopal Church. I was attending an American Baptist church in Cleveland Heights with Wendy and our two boys. And we basically didn't do anything with the liturgical year. Now, Wendy knew all about it because she was the soloist at the Catholic Cathedral downtown and played churches all over Cleveland. But this little Baptist guy had no clue about the season. And so I came that Sunday, all excited because this is preparation for Christmas, and I'm expecting stories about Mary, the baby Jesus, angels, shepherds, and heard readings like today about the end of the world, and I was wondering, what in the world is this about? And maybe some of you are new to the Episcopal Church and the liturgical year. So I want to talk about a little bit about this. A little history about Advent and Christmas. For the first 300 plus years of Christianity, Easter and Lent was it. Easter in particular. It was at the Easter Vigil that people would be baptized after a year or more of preparation. And it was the only time baptism was done. There were no concern over dying without being baptized, since Augustine had yet not come up with the doctrine of original sin, and there was no concern about what happened to the unbaptized. That was a much later development. The establishment of Christmas occurred somewhere in the mid-300s. There isn't any agreement on the actual date of setting it for December 25th. I was looking this up on Tuesday and sent me down quite a rabbit hole. I spent far too much time looking through the internet, picking up some of this information that. What I found was that Pope Julius I, pretty well established, was the one that gave that date. You'll notice mid-300s, this is about the time of Constantine, the Nicene Creed. Christianity is becoming a recognized religion of the state, so some things needed to be standardized in that. One source gives one date, and another source gave a date 20 years before the other date, said that Julius was consecrated pope. So one of the two obviously isn't correct. So I don't know, I can't tell you exactly what it was. But it was certain the date was chosen to coincide with the winter solstice, and celebrations were adapted from the pagan world in hopes the conversion of pagans would be easier if they didn't have to give up one of their major holidays. And there was a big one in the Roman world on the winter solstice, as there were in the Druids in England and in the Norse gods and all those other places. And what happened was the coming of the light, as in the winter solstice, became the coming of the light, as in Jesus, into our world, and it all made sense, and you could keep all those holidays together, and people could keep their customs. We just reinterpreted all of them. Now, yes, so Christian does have some pagan roots as to the date, and that led the Puritans in colonial Massachusetts to ban the celebration of Christmas as a pagan holiday and as something to be devoutly ignored, to quote Scrooge in A Christmas Tale. So yes, there was a war on Christmas in this country, but it was in pre-revolutionary Puritans in Massachusetts that led the fight. I find it interesting that the most conservative group of that was in Massachusetts. When you think of today's world, it's kind of incongruous, isn't it? Following that ancient tradition, the gospel readings we have this morning is about being prepared. So the first two Sundays, and this was written in 380. This, we have a piece of paper that's got a date. And it was laid out, the first 2 weeks was about the second coming, then a week with John the Baptist, and finally a mention of Mary, and maybe something about the baby Jesus, But all that was saved until Christmas days and the 12 days of Christmas, because that's when Christmas really starts, not the day after Halloween. By the way, if I drive by, if any of you have live Christmas trees, I don't want to see them out on your yards on December 26th. So we follow that tradition in our lectionary. The reading is about the coming of the kingdom today. Last year's readings we had some from Mark, and there's not a single mention of the birth of Jesus in year B. It was all end of the world stuff, but that's what Mark's community was focused on. This year we begin year C and reading Luke. And that's where we do get the story of the birth of Jesus. Yet the message for Advent is still about being prepared for God to do something wonderful and probably just a little terrifying. Luke is written during a very tough time for the early church. They have realized that, well, maybe the second isn't like right around the corner, because there's a bunch of people who were promised it wouldn't happen until they were dead, and they're dead. Several rounds of persecutions have occurred. The temple in Jerusalem has been destroyed, and all of the disciples are long dead. They really believe that the world would end soon, and that leaves us in the 21st century with a bit of a problem, because 2,000 years later, the world is not ending, even though there are plenty of people who seem to think that it is. What we see in the readings, especially from Jeremiah, is though a theme of disaster for the Jewish nation, followed by God acting in a way that restores the world as they knew it and made everything right. It's a message of justice, as Diane Butler Bass wrote this morning. It's a message of justice and love. Jeremiah is writing after the Babylonians have conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the city, and took much of the population captive. There's a command to be awake, be aware, be ready, is about God is going to act as he has in the past. Israel and Judah will be restored, and all will be well. But they needed to be ready. The promise that a true sprout will come from the David tree. The analogy in our Luke passage is that the fig tree is ready to sprout. The fig tree is always a metaphor for Israel in the world of Luke. It's the promise of the restoration, but they are called to wake up and pay attention. The question then is, what are we waiting for? Some look at readings like this and say we are waiting for the physical second coming and a physical end of the world. This has been very popular and is continuing to be popular in some Christian circles. Many of you may remember the whole Left Behind series, the books, the movies, and all that kind of stuff. And that. If you want to have a conversation about the rapture and what I think about that, that's a whole nother topic, and I'd be happy to have that conversation with you. There are people waiting for that rapture and then the end. Many are convinced that the end is here. I hear it from several of my neighbors, and there are several prominent Christian writers who've been working on this theme for the past couple of years. My issue with this, though, is that then people become focused on the end times and forget that we have to live our lives in the immediate time. That there are people who are still hungry, they're poor, ill, refugees, homeless, that we are supposed to care about, that are more focused on today than someday in the future. So what does it mean that we are waiting for the kingdom? Is this a passive event? Or maybe this is about working to bring the kingdom into the world right now. The theology in John's gospel is that the resurrection marks the second part of the coming of the kingdom, and that is here right now, and our call is to be alert for it and recognize the kingdom when we see it right now today. I spoke about this last week when I talked about how the Trinity is infused in all the world, all of creation, that we're all connected by the Trinity that fills creation. So the Advent one is a call to wake up and look around and see the kingdom that is right outside your door and right in this room. Richard Rohr said that Advent is a journey in awareness of Christ. Sometimes that journey is as close as turning and seeing Christ in your neighbor. Take the time to invite Christ into your life this Advent, and not just the baby, but the Christ who was and is to come. When I walked the Camino de Santiago, I went with the purpose of seeing the divine in every person, in every place along the way, seeing Christ. Now, there are many caminos that you can walk in Spain. In fact, you can start almost in any city in Europe, or even as far away as Jerusalem, and find a camino, and they all lead to Santiago de Compostela and the cathedral. There is one destination, but many ways to get there. And that is an analogy for the religious life of many people. There is one journey, and that is in a relationship with God. That's how the kingdom works. The center is God, the Trinity. But there are many paths to get to the center. Now, the problem in our world is like Martha and the Martha and Mary story, is that we are distracted by many things. The world pulls us in multiple directions, all of which distract us from seeing the kingdom or even having the time to look for it or the time to even think about it. Many years ago, a member of another congregation came up to me and said, Father Mark, please, tell me you aren't planning any special programs for Advent. I know I should come, but I'm too busy getting ready for Christmas. At which point she turned quite red and went, that didn't come out the way I meant it. I said, maybe it did. She said, yeah, it did. It's exactly what she meant. And that's the problem, because most of us would say the same thing. Now, I haven't talked about this here, and it's sort of gone on my back burner, but there is something out there called the Advent Conspiracy. There's a link on the church's Facebook page in one of the posts I put up there, and to see what it's about, or just Google Advent Conspiracy. There's a web page for it and several videos on YouTube. One of my favorite points is it says, we turn ho, ho, ho into go, go, go. And if you are exhausted when you get to Christmas Day, then you probably haven't done Advent right. There are 4 parts to the Advent Conspiracy. And I'll warn you, it is countercultural to the secular Christmas. The 4 parts are worship fully, spend less, give more, and love all. Worship fully, spend less, give more, love all. Worship fully, come and participate in our services and programs, a couple of which Julie is going to talk about during the announcements. Pick up a copy of the Advent book and set aside some time each day to read and really ponder the message that you find there. Spend some of your time this Advent with God and Christ. Spend less. The message we hear is buy, spend, spend, spend. This then states us into a state of busyness to try to get the perfect gift and stresses us. Gift giving is fine, don't get me wrong. But in the fastest growing business in the United States right now is storage facilities. Think about that. Look around Katy and you see them everywhere. All places store stuff that we don't have room for in our homes and our garages. And I know I've got more than a few neighbors who can't put a car in their garage. All places to store stuff that we don't necessarily need that badly. I know a person who on January turns all the clothes around in her closet, hangs them backwards. And come New Year's Eve the next year, she looks, and any item of clothing that's still hung backwards goes out to Katy Christian Ministries to the thrift store. Because obviously, if I didn't wear it in the last year, maybe I don't need it. I mean, one of our jokes is our son who's living in England. Now, you know, England apartments and that are much smaller than ours. Looked at Wendy's closet in our Texas bedroom and said, Mom, you realize your closet is bigger than our second bedroom. Give more. My family now spends more in donations to charities that are important to each of us than we do on gifts. Now, granted, with a new grandchild in England and a grandniece and a grandnephew in Milwaukee, yes, there are some gift giving, and of course we're going to do that. But how much does little Ellie really need, and how many other children do not have things like a warm coat for the winter? By the way, we are accepting coats for the 2 elementary schools for another week, so it's not too late to buy that and make that donation. Donations to this parish help promote our programs and our missions. Donations to all kinds of ministries around Katy help those who are in need, and they are here. So consider a Christmas gift to the church or to your favorite charity. Finally, love all. If there is any of these that can be a challenge, especially this year, it's to love all, especially when we know some people who are not very lovable. A couple weeks ago, PBS did a program to honor Rodgers and Hammerstein. One of the musicals they featured was South Pacific. I didn't know that the producers of that musical wanted them to eliminate a song before they would allow the show to be produced. And Rodgers and Hammerstein said, no. If you don't include the song, the show will not be produced. The song, you have to be taught to hate. It was that important to them. And it's important to us now. I think that in today's world, we need to be taught how to love. And for that, we need only to look to Jesus. Jesus, in his human form, showed us how to love ourselves, love our neighbors. The human Jesus taught us how to be fully human. Now, I'm not saying don't enjoy the season. I'm not an old curmudgeon. But I will suggest you remember the real reason for the season, the coming of Jesus into our world then, now, and Christ in the future. This is the reason for Advent. If you really want to put Christ back into Christmas, consider the challenge of the Advent conspiracy. Worship fully, spend less, give more, and most importantly, love fully. Now that, I think, is a way to have a meaningful Advent and a Christ-filled Christmas. Amen.
I was in there